Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us here. We're really excited to have everybody here for a wonderful afternoon. Great information to hear some fantastic teen speakers. They're going to be talking about a variety of different topics. They've been researching it, they've been rehearsing, and they've been practicing all to give you as best information as possible. Before we kick things off, though, we are going to have a special welcome from our community librarian next door from Cupertino Library. This is our community librarian. Please give a big round of applause for Miss Clare Varesio.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Clare Varesio. I'm the community librarian at Cupertino Library. I am so happy to have all of you here this afternoon. Our Cupertino community is known for innovation, for imagination, for inspiration, and I am so excited for our speakers today. They get to have the opportunity to share their vision with you, and I'm very grateful we get to give them a venue to do that. I'd like to thank the City of Cupertino, the Friends of the Cupertino Library who helped support our event today, and also the city's Teen Commission, as well as our library's own Teen Advisory Board, who helped organize this event for you all as well. I hope that you enjoyed today's speakers, and I'd like to turn it over to today's MCs. Come on up, ladies.
Hi guys, and welcome to TEDxYouth at Torrey Avenue 2019. We'd like to thank you guys all for coming out today, and we're so excited to have you. I'm Varsha.
And I'm Krithika, and we'll be your MCs for today's event. The theme for this year's event is Innovation Out of the Box. The teens that will be speaking to you shortly are all teens from our very own community, and because of their passion and their drive, they exemplify the meaning of innovation.
So what does innovation mean? The dictionary definition tells us that innovation is the action of changing something that is established. But as our speakers are going to show you very shortly, there's a much deeper meaning to innovation. Innovation can happen both on the large scale and on the small scale within our own communities. It can happen in any field, from math to science to art to philosophy and more.
It's often overlooked how much courage it requires to be an innovator, to deviate from the norm and to make a change. Changing something that's considered established can be a daunting task, and innovators often face many obstacles on their path to making the world a better place.
The 6 people that will be speaking to you guys today have chosen to not let these obstacles stop them from achieving their goals. We hope that they're as much of an inspiration to you guys as they were for us. But before we see them today, we're gonna take a quick minute to thank our sponsors for helping make this event possible for today.
Now, we'd like to show you a short video that will give you more details on what TEDx as an organization is actually about.
From Kenya to Colombia, from Iraq to Korea, in slums, in schools, in prisons, and in theaters, every day people gather at TEDx events around the world to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. Today, you are part of a global conversation about our shared future. So what is this TEDx? TEDx is an initiative of the TED Conference, a non-profit devoted to ideas worth spreading. We grant free licenses to allow TED-like events to spread globally. This event today is based on the TED Conference format and ideals, but is independently organized by your local community. So please make sure to thank the team of volunteers who worked so hard on today's event. It's their ideas, dedication, and time that made it all possible. It's they who booked all the speakers, and the views you'll hear today are, of course, those of those speakers, not necessarily of TEDs. But we hope their talks spark an exciting conversation among you. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for openness and for critical thinking, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you'll take out. And now, on with the show.
So our first speaker has used her ability in coding and app design in order to create an app called Alleviate, which helps children with autism. This app has been widely recognized by both teachers and students and serves as an inspiration for all of us to get involved in our community from a young age. Now presenting Eesha Ramkumar.
This is Tyler. When Tyler was 2 years old, differences between him and other kids his age were noticeable. He would not respond to his name. He would not point to objects when asked. His parents were worried. Their research pointed to the autism spectrum disorder, but they quickly dismissed that idea. No, that couldn't be it. It wasn't until Tyler was 6 years old, entering the first grade, that he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, a group of complex developmental disabilities that cause problem with social interaction and communication. Tyler's social, behavioral, and language issues were prominent. At age 6, he had a 22-word vocabulary, while his peers were virtual chatterboxes. He had trouble with his memory as he couldn't even remember the names of his own family members. Though a sweet kid at heart, Tyler didn't interact much with others. He didn't make eye contact. He barely smiled, and most certainly hated to be touched. The truth is, when someone mentions autism, we tend to push it away, pretend like we already know about it. The media likes to show us all the feel-good stories, like the child with autism who is a great singer on Britain's Got Talent, or the other one who is their student body president. We pretend to be aware, but that isn't the truth. Autism can be sad, frustrating, and isolating. In the United States alone, autism affects 1 in 68 individuals and over 100 million worldwide. Over 1/3 of adults with autism are left unemployed, and over 66% of kids with autism are bullied. In fact, I only became aware of autism in my freshman year of high school when I visited the special education community for autistic individuals. Here, I saw kids my age struggle to be heard, shut down from opportunities, even though their promising talents were so immense. I spent my afternoons with them. I would teach them the alphabet, play games with them, do anything I could. And while I was there, I noticed something that fascinated me, something I found interesting. These kids, who were somehow deemed unusual, not considered normal by society's standards, were incredibly comfortable using technology. They were messaging friends, playing games, taking pictures, and it was here that it struck me. Perhaps I could help them a different way. Perhaps I could use technology, create an app to help them with their vocabulary and their emotions. There was just one problem. I couldn't code at all. When you need to create an app, what do you write? Where do you write it? How do you even write it? How does that work? I was so intimidated. I had seen others do it, but somehow when it was my turn, I was just lost. I didn't even know what to make my app about. With 2 other friends, I reached out to specialists, mentors, directors. We asked them what was going to help, what was needed, and what was really going to make a difference. The real question was, how are we going to build it? I quite frankly spent hours together scrolling through Stack Overflow, looking at YouTube and Khan Academy. At one point, I didn't even like the app I was building, so much that I had to scratch the entire thing, rebuild, restart, and rethink. I felt like I'd failed. Here I was, a teenager trying to balance academic course load and build an app. I was overwhelmed. But after a couple of challenging months, my friends and I had finally created the app, Alleviate. Alleviate is a combination of 2 features that target the significant portion of obstacles faced by those individuals with autism. The first feature is the interaction feature. This feature teaches them about daily activities, emotions, objects, allowing them to build their vocabulary. The app shows them a picture. Here we have a woman who's upset. It then asks them a question out loud, like, how is this lady feeling? After hearing that question, the student can then respond back to the app with an answer, like, sad. What's really exciting about this feature, looking at the technical side, is that it makes use of a speech-to-text API. And what this API does is it does the translation. It does the converting from your voice to actual words that can then be processed by the computer, allowing for that conversation to be had. The second feature is the relaxation feature. This feature aims to calm and relax anxiety. It has meditative tracks, calming music, and a personalizable breathing simulator. The simulator is actually set to the pace of calm breathing, and that expanding and contracting nature then allows for them to inhale and exhale, calming them down. I was so excited with my product. I gave it to every single student at the center I had met. That was the most rewarding moment I could have asked for. They were actually using the app. They were breathing in and out with the simulator. They were speaking to the feature. It somehow felt like I had given them the attention they needed, given them a gift meant only for them. And I couldn't have been happier than in that moment. The truth is, I should add, not everything was perfect. There were still errors. Certain features weren't working properly, others were confusing, and I had to use their feedback to then improve my app. I tell you my story because I want to inspire you as young adults to take time to find ways to create a better future for the people around you. Last year, I taught over 200 kids from public schools how to code because I wanted to give them the tools and teach them a little more about technology so they don't feel intimidated like I did and can help their communities as well. So whether you choose to use music, art, science, technology, we can create a better tomorrow by starting today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eesha, for your research and help with those with autism. You are really an inspiration to us that we don't need to become adults before we make a change to our community. Our next speaker has become popular through her singing and songwriting account on Instagram. She's here to talk to us about gender inequality and her own experiences of being put in a box and constructed by gender norms by those close to her, and how she was able to break free from these gender norms. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Pranja Mishra.
Think outside the box, but don't color outside the lines. Think outside the box, but do exactly what I told you to do. Think outside the box, think outside the box, think outside the box, but sometimes thinking outside the box is not as black and white as it seems, especially when it comes to traditionalism and the good Indian girl culture, which is centered so strongly around core family values. Family values. Family. When you think about family, you think about your mom, dad, brother, sister, cousins, who knows? You think about the happy times you had when they took you to the hospital after you broke your leg while riding your bike, I don't know. Or like when they got you that pack of colored pencils you've wanted since the beginning of first grade. You love them. And then you remember how they told you that you were a fat pig for wanting to eat a meal that day. Or when they told you that you were a skank for wearing a sports uniform. And of course, you were stupid for wanting to achieve anything other than marriage. But you love them. Oh, you love them so much that it hurts. Because their ambitions, their thoughts, their opinions on you matter. And honestly, with the world moving as fast as it is today, people tend to forget that girls that are raised in these traditionalist values not only have a hard time trying to be different, but they have a hard time even thinking to think outside of the box, because they know that they are going to receive judgment from not only others, but the people that they love. And honestly, it is not the judgment that hurts us. It's the fact that we're making the ones around us that we love hurt. That's kind of the salt on the wound, if you know what I mean. And that kind of sucks, to be very honest with you. The main idea here is simple, right? When it comes to traditionalism and the good Indian girl culture, everyone else's thoughts on you matter, except for yourself. Yourself, right? Now we're talking about you. So do me a favor. Let's say you had a very bad week at work or a very bad week at school. You know, we've had a lot of those. I just graduated, so yay, no more of that. But what do you expect yourself to be doing at around 4:30 a.m. on that Saturday morning? Probably not being woken up by your mother because your family from India called to complain to her about you. For what? Pictures. Let me explain, okay? So I am signed to an agency for my music and my acting, and just a couple weeks ago, I hit a major milestone, and I was actually on radio for the first time. So that was a huge deal, and it was down in North Hollywood, Wish 107.5, and it was amazing. It was a great experience. And interestingly enough, this conversation happened prior to this big day. It was when my manager decided to put me into modeling. So, you know, I kind of know how to be in front of a camera, and I don't pose like a dead crane. You know, it was necessary because I was very awkward. So I was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. You know, I went to a workshop and we learned how to pose, and then later I had a photo shoot for my up-and-coming album, and this was that photo. Okay, this was that photo. Got it. Now, as you can see, I'm wearing an oversized Puma jacket with some boots and my mid-thigh showing. Let me tell you, that mid-thigh has caused me a lot of trouble. Enough for my family in India to call my mom and, you know, tell her that I was a disappointment and a slag. But honestly, it is nothing new, because I've been told to never come back home because my viewpoints did not align with my family's. I have been told to give up on ambitions from close friends because that's stupid, and so don't do it. And of course, my vocabulary has grown immensely. And it's very colorful now by the amounts of things that people have told me for wanting to wrestle as a girl. Big whoop there, right? So, yes. It is definitely something that is faced on a day-to-day basis. Now, let's go back a little bit, okay? So, when it comes to traditionalism and the good Indian girl culture, there are people out there, okay? It is 2019, ladies and gentlemen, and there are people out there that are still being forced to be married at an early age. There are girls in parts of Asia and Africa that are forced to be married at an age as young as 7 to older men. It is 2019, ladies and gentlemen, and girls are still being told that they are stupid for wanting independence and an education, which, may I add, when it comes to traditionalist values, is very outside of the box to want education and independence. It is 2019, ladies and gentlemen, and people are still judging girls by their outward appearance instead of what they have to say. Now, in places such as Somalia, parts of Mali, Djibouti, there are places like this where girls are actually told to sew themselves up in order to save their virginity for marriage. Because as a traditionalist value, it is greatly regarded both on the bride's side as well as on the husband's side. There are so many written and unwritten rules, that keep girls back in the day and now trapped in this box of traditionalism, okay, with chains that are being added for every year that they grow older. I mean, gosh forbid, that these girls start gaining some confidence in these years of growing. I mean, I wish I was joking about things like this, but I'm honestly not. Because when we talk about traditionalism, okay, on jagare.com, which is a pre-activism website, many people have stated that the perfect girl is somebody whose values and decisions are still solely based on her home and her family. It is not a surprise that 70% of modern Indian women, okay, face physical as well as sexual abuse. And more than 50% of the adult population, let me say that again, more than 50% of the adult population believes that this is justifiable. Take a minute to let that sink in. Now, you tell me, okay, if girls are being bound in this box of traditionalism, okay, with chains of doubt, with chains of worry, and with chains of just self-hatred, how are they supposed to think out of the box? How? You break it. Yes, it is great to think outside the box. It's great to think about what you could have said, what you could have been, but you need to do it. What did you say? What did you become? And honestly, these traditions and these chains that I've been talking about, this isn't anything new. We all know that. This has been going around since forever. I mean, a good example of this is the word ladylike from the Victorian era and the way it was used, or the cult of domesticity in the 19th century, and of course, the good Indian girl culture. Yes, it is definitely great to think outside, but don't be afraid to break the box that you're trapped in. Because you know what? I understand. It's going to be scary. It's going to suck. It is going to make you feel, it's going to make you feel guilty. But the things that you achieve, the self-innovations that you get afterwards, is so going to be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranja, for this inspiring take on traditionalism that you just gave us. Now, let's switch tracks to hepatitis B. Although this particular illness does have a vaccine against it, there are still so many worldwide who suffer. Our next speaker, Stuti, has poured time and energy into bringing awareness about this particular illness with her peers at Stanford Asian Liver Center. And today, she's here to provide the same message of awareness to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's have a hand for Stuti.
By the time this 40-second hourglass runs out of sand, one person will have died from hepatitis B. Hepatitis B is a disease that can lead to liver damage, liver cancer, and liver failure. It claims over 600,000 lives each year and leads to over 70% of all liver cancer-related deaths. What's especially staggering about these statistics is that scientists were able to create a vaccine for hepatitis B in 1965, nearly 55 years ago. This vaccine was so effective, it was dubbed the world's first anti-cancer vaccine by the World Health Organization. Despite the commercialization of this extremely effective vaccine, over half a century ago, 240 million people worldwide are affected by hepatitis B, and this is a problem. My talk today is centered around this disease and is organized into 3 different sections. First, general information and background about the disease. Second, my personal experiences and motivation for delivering this talk. And finally, how we as a community can innovate an environment in which we are all more aware about hepatitis B and know how to react to and deal with this disease. Let's start off by talking about Hep B as a disease. As I mentioned earlier, Hep B affects the liver and claims over 600,000 lives each year. What I didn't mention is that Hep B is a silent killer, which means it often does not show any symptoms until it is far too late to treat. For example, even if you are affected with the disease when you are 25, you may not show any symptoms until you are 55, at which point the liver damage is too severe. There are no cures for hepatitis B, although there are effective treatments if you diagnose the disease early enough. Because of this, it is essential that everyone gets tested and screened early in life. Another key characteristic about this disease is that it is especially prevalent in Asian communities. Compared to the 1 in 1,000 non-Hispanic whites who are living with hepatitis B, as signified by that small red bar, 1 in 12 Asians are living with hepatitis B. Take a second to compare these two diagrams. 1 in 1,000 non-Hispanic whites to 1 in 12 Asian Americans. To put this in a different light, even though Asian Americans consist of less than 6% of the American population, they make up over 50% of the population living with hepatitis B. In Cupertino, where there is such a large Asian population, it is essential that we all understand our increased risk for this disease. In this room today, I'm sure there are several people who know about hepatitis B and its increased prevalence in Asian communities. However, I can also guarantee you that there are several people who have never heard about hepatitis B and how prevalent it is in Asian communities. And this is a problem. Until every single person in this room is aware, and every single person in our community is aware about hepatitis B, our job is not done. One reason for the general lack of awareness surrounding hepatitis B is that because in Asian countries and in Asian populations, the disease as a whole is heavily stigmatized. Hepatitis B is passed and transmitted similarly to HIV, so through blood, birth, and sexual intercourse. The disease cannot be transmitted casually. It can't be passed by sharing foods or drinks, coughing, sneezing, or holding hands. Unfortunately, many people are unaware that Hep B is not transmitted casually, and because of this, hepatitis B carriers face serious discrimination. In fact, in China, workplace discrimination was so severe that in 2010, the Chinese government had to pass laws banning involuntary hepatitis B testing prior to offering someone a job or accepting someone into school. Oftentimes, Hep B carriers face much worse than just workplace discrimination. They can be shunned by friends, isolated by family, and feel alone and at fault for a disease they often have no control over. And given the general stigma and taboo surrounding the disease, many people refuse to get tested or vaccinated. To give you some background on the vaccine, it consists of 3 shots. Dose 2 should be separated from dose 1 by a minimum of 1 month, and dose 3 should be separated from dose 2 by a minimum of 5 months. The whole course takes as little as 6 months and is completely safe. Still, many people refuse to get tested and they refuse to get vaccinated. To them, not knowing whether they have the disease and possibly losing their life to it is a better alternative than getting tested, getting unfavorable results, and then living a life of shame. Unfortunately, this mindset and this attitude does nothing but reinforce a vicious cycle in which stigma and taboo surrounding hepatitis B prevent any sort of meaningful conversation that could help save lives. Because of this, 2 key takeaways that I would like to imprint on all of you today is that hepatitis B is A, extremely prevalent in Asian communities, and B, largely stigmatized based on misconceptions. Now that I've talked about hepatitis B as a disease, I want to segue to my own personal experiences. I was first introduced to the disease in a week-long summer program hosted by the Asian Liver Center at Stanford University. At first, hepatitis B seemed like any other disease, sad but not extraordinary. I didn't become seriously passionate about awareness until I realized that people were dying despite a well-established vaccine. Lives were being lost for no reason. To me, if something as simple as starting conversations and clearing up misconceptions could mean less people were losing their friends and losing their family, then it was my obligation to do whatever I could to support the cause. Because of this, I joined 2 outreach committees, or OCs. For the newsletter OC, I wrote bi-weekly articles on hepatitis B and events that ALC was trying to host. For the International Awareness OC, which is more significant to my talk today, I traveled to China for a week, visiting various middle schools and high schools and working on outreach. Through this experience, I was able to firsthand witness the stigmatization of the disease. When people saw our blue shirts and understood what we were talking about, many of them turned away or just avoided us altogether. Still, I was able to talk to people who faced discrimination every day because they were carriers. I was able to clear up misconceptions firsthand, and I was able to hear the stories of people affected by hepatitis B. This was an eye-opening experience for me. What stuck with me the most, however, were not the stories from people I heard in China, but the stories from students who had traveled with me from back home in Cupertino. I've changed the names to respect their privacy, but one of my friends, William, who goes to Lynbrook High School, told me that both of his parents had hepatitis B, and they didn't tell him until he was 16 because they were that embarrassed. One of my other friends, Sarah, who goes to Castillejo High School in Palo Alto, told me that Sarah's mom had hepatitis B. And when Sarah's mom told her parents, or Sarah's grandparents shunned Sarah's mom, and they hadn't spoken to Sarah's mom in 20 years. Hearing these stories made hepatitis B and its negative impact come alive in my eyes. I had always considered the disease more of a problem for countries like China, or Africa, or India. But I now realize that hepatitis B affects every single one of us in this community, whether it be directly or indirectly. I also realized that although it was great to travel to China and work on outreach there was still a lot of work to be done at home. Because of this, I started taking steps to combat hepatitis B in Cupertino. My friend Jamie Chan and I have started our own nonprofit organization. Currently, we are working with the Public Safety Commission to maximize our reach and get involved with larger events. We frequently set up booths at the De Anza flea market and in front of the library to try and reach out to the most amount of people. We partner with local businesses like Hongyan Art, and we volunteer at events like fairs, festivals, and runs, so we can have more of our community be aware about hepatitis B. Our nonprofit's goal is that 100% of the residents in Cupertino are either vaccinated or are getting tested if they're already living with the disease and getting the treatments they need. This is not to say that our nonprofit organization has created radical change and has been incredibly effective, but we are doing whatever we can to help fight and to help advance the fight against hepatitis B. This brings me to my final point today. Why should we care so much, and why should we put so much effort into fighting hepatitis B? The most obvious answer is that outreach and awareness can save lives, especially when the outreach is happening in a community so heavily populated with Asians. Even though all students attending a public school in California are required to have the Hep B vaccine, there's a large amount of people who immigrate to Cupertino from countries like China at an older age, which leaves much of the population at risk. And even if we ourselves are vaccinated and can't be living with the disease, we should still learn about and understand something that could affect so many of our friends and families. And once we have this knowledge, we should try to spread it, whether it be getting involved in an organization or just talking to our friends and family. Nothing I mentioned today fits the traditional image of innovation. No new apps are being created, no new technologies are being made. But as the speakers before me have mentioned, innovation comes in many different forms. In this case, we must innovate a community in which we are all more aware about hepatitis B and its effects. We must innovate a community in which we can discuss this disease free of stigmas and taboos. And we must innovate a community in which we do not judge or shame hepatitis B carriers, but rather accept and help them. And this innovation should not just stop at hepatitis B, but should carry forward to any and every single other disease. Lastly, I would like to conclude my talk today by encouraging every single one of you to innovate like Jamie and I have with our nonprofit organization. Perhaps after listening to this talk today, hepatitis B does not sound interesting at all. That's fine. We all have certain subjects or certain topics that we're passionate about. For me, it was Hep B. For you, it could be anything. Find what you're interested in, find a way to get involved, and find a way to innovate the change you want to see, no matter what that change may be. Thank you so much for listening to my talk today. If you have any questions about the information I've covered, or if you would like to get involved in our nonprofit organization, please feel free to contact me at the information above. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuti, for providing awareness about such an important issue. In the society, in the community that we live in today, which is largely dominated by STEM majors, it can sometimes be easy to forget that the arts and the humanities play just as important a role in our society. In fact, many of the websites and the apps that we enjoy today would not have been made possible without all the designers and artists that put in hours and hours of their time into making the gorgeous interfaces that we interact with. Our next speaker, Ashley, is here to explain to you why we definitely should not overlook the role of designers and artists in today's world. Over to you, Ashley.
Art is something that I think many people would describe as distant and foreign. It's something you did as a child. Your fingers, your paintbrush, your drool, your paint, and the walls, your infinite canvas. Or it's something your 5th grade teacher made you do. And we complained about it. Ungrateful children. However, art is a concept much more familiar to you than you may realize, and holds the key to pushing innovation to more sophisticated levels. Many of you have lived here in Silicon Valley your whole lives. You grew up with engineers for parents, coding classes on the weekends, tears when you finally found an accidental slash in your code after 5 hours. At the very least, I can confidently say that you are all aware of the heavy STEM atmosphere in this area. Kind of hard to miss it really when every wrong turn you make, you end up in an Apple building. Another thing you might notice living here is there isn't a strong affinity for artistic creativity. It's not surprising. Coming to the technology hub of the world, you wouldn't really expect to see art. After all, think about the images that pop up in your head at the word art. Van Gogh, Picasso, Dali, and so on. Not quite the spitting images of logical thinkers. This expectation stems from the misconception that the world of science, logic, and math does not collide in any way with the world of abstract, romantic poeticism. Because of this, it's understandable that many people distance themselves purposely from art because they believe they are more suited for STEM, or vice versa. However, the term art is changing and has been evolving for the past decades. Art is adaptive. It was at first a way to document memories, people, and the marks left behind by history. Then it became an expression of self, a way to let go of any internal emotions and feelings. But now, it's all of these things, but it's also useful. It is used to advertise, to entice, to persuade and inform. You might be confused. Art can do all of these things? Yes. Because anything that is intentional and creative, anything that is designed and visual can be considered art, the visual media is capable of doing all these things. Let me give you some examples. How many of you can't really tell what is considered contemporary art? It's difficult to distinguish. There was a kind of social experiment a few years ago where a person put a pair of glasses, probably just something they found at home from middle school, put a plaque next to it that had an identical format as the other exhibits, and deceived people into believing it was a piece there. No one knew. Passerbys looked at it curiously, discussing what the artist could have intended, why it was a pair of broken glasses, and so on. In hindsight, it sounds a little stupid. People mock contemporary art for this reason. Anything can be considered art. But that's exactly my point. Art has no restrictions. Allow me to give you a bit more of a focused example. My mother is a graduate of the San Francisco Academy of Art University,
and is now a graphic, web, and UX, or user experience, designer. Basically, she makes the websites that engineers create look pretty and appealing. She adds effects so that while the user scrolls on the page, the website moves and changes, giving it more of an interactive feel than just any old website. She makes elaborate collages with images and colors that hypnotize. I remember growing up, she would do her own projects as well, such as making an elaborate and detailed set of typography. It was incredible to watch, because I'd never seen someone spend 6 hours trying to write the letter A. It was then that I realized that while it is not conventional, graphic design is undeniably a form of art, no matter what its purpose is for. If my mother could make the alphabet into art, then why can't anything be made into art? Okay, so art is everywhere. It's design, it's an object, it's anything we want it to be. So, how do we use it? Well, as innovators, we want to be able to incorporate art with what we make, not just for the visual appeal, but because we as humans react to the emotional and creative efforts that are put in behind an idea. Now, this overlapping of art and innovation is where we start to have problems. Often, the mindsets of engineers and artists clash a little too close for comfort. I've seen my mother in a huff several times because she knows that visually, this font, or that image, or this color will not work with the website in any way, but her less visually apt coworkers say otherwise. However, once she works out the kinks in a project with her coworkers, I've seen amazing end results that simply dazzle. They're gorgeous to look at, but they're also flawless in terms of execution and application. A simple way to look at this would be to view a website that we all know. Now, how many of us in here watch YouTube? Can I see some hands? Yeah, many of us. Now, how many of us have been watching YouTube since its old format? No, not the update before this one or from a few years ago. I mean the first format of YouTube. I don't think many of us know the old format, which is a blessing because honestly, it was kind of a tragic atrocity. The bland colors, the outdated font, the way the website throws up all these options and choices at the user is just all a mess, to be completely honest. It can be forgiven, I guess, considering it was made more than 10 years ago. But let's take a look at today's format. The clean colors, the simplicity while still allowing the user to access whatever they need to. How it has a focus to the overall website. So much better, isn't it? The artistic choices in terms of the color scheme, formatting, everything comes together to make a much more satisfying piece of design. The user feels at home and comfortable. We want to actually use the website. Is there a lot that changed in terms of the product intent itself? No. YouTube has been and is a platform for users to create and watch videos. It's just become more alluring. I mean, what's the point of having an amazing product or website that no one will use because it's, for lack of a better word, ugly? It will go to waste. So much potential gone in a blink. It's easy to brag that your product is so good that even if it's terrible looking, people will be drawn to it because that's that good. But it's kind of like, would you rather eat an In-N-Out burger with the crunchy fresh greens and tomato peeking out and the meat nicely cooked, or a suspicious looking burger with a weird lack of vegetables and the meanest school cafeteria food color that the cook claims is the best thing you'll eat? Sorry, but I don't think I would take my chances. I've seen too many crime shows to know where this is going. Basically, innovation without artistic appeal can be close to pointless. We're just made that way as humans. It's how we've grown. As content creators, innovators, engineers, artists alike, we must cater to our audience what they're going to want. How you present something shows how much you care about it. If we are truly to be the generations of innovation, then we must understand this connection. After all, with this in mind, how much more refined can our ideas become? How many more startups can begin to blossom and bloom? How many more Apples and Samsungs and Googles can rise? Let's start to build with both logic and creativity hand in hand. And I cannot wait to see what can come out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for your words of wisdom. Our next speaker is here to give you her take on gender inequality and also to tell you about her ideas for solutions in order to bring more women into STEM careers. Let's have a big hand for Janvi.
Hi, my name is Janvi. Now, let me ask you to think of an innovation. What would you say? Now, most of you would think of technology companies and their products, or groundbreaking markets like artificial intelligence or machine learning, which are great examples, but let's look at the dictionary, see if we can really think outside the box. The Oxford American Dictionary states the definition of innovation as a new method, idea, project, etc. With that in mind, let's think of innovation as a new idea that helps tackle challenges facing society. Often, solutions to systemic issues are targeted directly and only at the affected group. But the problem with this approach is that it isn't inclusive of the collective impact. Take photography, for example. Let's say you take a picture and realize that the lighting is often one portion of it. What do? Now, you wouldn't just zoom into the affected area and then adjust the exposure there. You'd look at the full frame of the photo and then adjust the settings based on that. So, why is this? Because you're accounting for the collective impact and not just the affected area. And the same thinking goes for existing societal challenges like gender equality, women empowerment, women in technology, etc. Identifying and approaching these challenges should be done through a lens far more inclusive than just of the women directly impacted. Men make up 49% of the population just in the US. So if we want to change, everyone should be part of the development. The He for She movement, which started officially after an impassioned speech from Emma Watson 5 years ago, shows the importance of everyone in the fight for gender equality. The innovative idea here today is about encouraging all genders in order to achieve equality. Women and men need to partake as agents of change and take action against negative stereotypes and behaviors. According to Forbes, it's the duty of every person to support gender equality. It's simply an issue of humanity. So, how do we get started? But first, let's consider why it's critical that more than just women support gender equality. The answer is pretty straightforward, because equality and acceptance leads to success. And here's how. Now, you might think that hard work, perhaps intelligence, maybe even motivation leads to success, but that's not quite it. According to Stanford University, success, believe it or not, comes from equality. And the idea of jointly enabling all genders for the bigger societal success is the innovative thinking behind today's talk. So, how do we get started? But there's a problem. We all believe in equality, but how much are we educating both boys and girls in elementary, middle, and high school, or even as adults, about gender equality and acceptance? As much as we push our girls to work harder, are we educating both genders on the need to empower women and encourage them in the workforce? We are, in some respects, perpetuating the problem by forfeiting the opportunity to educate and instill this thought in all genders. To me, it sure seems like we'd be much more successful as a society if we focused on early education for all students. So, how can we start educating all students on this topic? As a student in the Silicon Valley, I've seen a lot of push for girls to get into STEM, which is great, but in order to bring about real change, we need to instill this thought in boys as well. We need to teach kids that this change in thinking will have a powerful impact. When I first entered middle school, I knew that studying and working hard was the only way I could accomplish things. But now as I'm growing up, I realize that it's important for me to go to the core of the issue. Women not being in STEM or not feeling equally empowered is only one part of the problem, but it's also about acceptance. Once young boys see young girls alongside them, it will show them a new norm from a young age. Have you ever thought about how many programs there are encouraging girls to participate in activities to show that they are equal? But this is a one-sided view. Just telling girls that they are equal isn't enough, and I hope that my idea about educating both genders on this topic resonates widely in our larger society. So, how can we achieve this? A simple start could be through human growth and development. A class that is taught in school so kids can understand the physical and emotional changes that they go through in their bodies. But why do the boys learn about the girls and vice versa? This is because it's basic information that we all need to know. And the same thinking goes for existing societal challenges like gender equality, women empowerment, women in technology, etc. Just as much as we teach our kids about their human bodies in biology, teaching kids about equality is education for the mind, and this needs to start early on if we want to see change in our world. According to Inform Ed, it's the duty of every person to support gender equality. We need to raise children to respect one another as individuals, no matter what gender they are. And a good way to teach this is through a class in school. When kids grow up and become adults, we want them to teach future generations the importance of equality. Global Partnership of Education states that teaching equality to the youngest learners is important for us to see change in our world today. As much as we teach our kids about their human bodies and how they grow and develop as they enter puberty, it's important to teach kids about gender equality as they enter the real world and face these societal challenges. During this human growth and development class, where we talk about these societal challenges, we can talk about the power of language connecting to gender equality. We can teach kids to recognize gender bias when they see or hear it. For example, let's look at the phrase, "be a man." Why do we say this? We are unknowingly saying that men should shape their self-worth around traditional notions of masculinity, and that their original behavior equals weakness. We can hold discussions on how gender bias has wormed its way into our everyday language, and that we should notice and change it. Another thing we can talk about during this, let's call it a societal challenges class, is purpose before popularity. Now, we all have that fear of not being accepted in school, work, or even in society. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stand up for what's right. We should teach kids that they will not be rewarded with popularity or social acceptance by participating in such behaviors. Gender equality is important for economic development, and we should let kids know that they will see change in our world by being more inclusive. Now, there's no doubt that equality and acceptance improves the well-being of individuals, cultures, communities, and nations worldwide. And finally, we can also highlight implicit biases such as benevolent sexism and gender inequality. Some people may look at a situation and say, I don't see any gender bias here, but there really is. The key is to understand and recognize these gender biases and manage them. For example, let's say you're in an election and there's a male and female candidate. the media perhaps unknowingly uses gender bias throughout much of the election. One can agree that the type of media coverage for the female candidate will focus more on her clothing designer or her role as a mother, rather than her actual policies and relations. Quality is far more important than for the role she is a contestant for. Another example is, let's say you're a working woman, and you get complimented only on your looks. It may feel nice. I mean, who doesn't like a compliment? This may even make your day when you're feeling blue. It won't seem harmful at all at first, but over time you'll realize that you're only getting superficial comments on your appearance and not on your work. Eventually, this will lead to frustration and discouragement. Now, these are only a few examples, and there are many more, and we should teach kids to recognize this early on. So, let's recap on what we've spoken about today. Gender empowerment and equality are not just female fights. It's a collective initiative that we should all be striving to defend. The future not only depends on women's advancement, but also on everyone redefining traditional gender roles. So here are a few key takeaways on women's empowerment that we can instill early on. 1, do not use traditional gender norms. In other words, boys can be sensitive and girls can be dominant too. And we should make the idea of women in the workforce or in school widespread. 2, we could reframe a discussion around women empowerment inclusive of all students. 3, while teaching about their human bodies in class, we can be sure to talk about the differences between boys and girls that may enable or disable women's advancement. 4, we can instill an environment where kids can recognize and speak up against inequality. And finally, this needs to start early on if we want to see change in our world, so we can make it a better place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johnby, for that enlightening speech and bringing awareness to such an important issue. Now, I have a question for all of you. How many of you guys have heard of the superbug phenomenon? Okay, so a couple people. Well, I know that I definitely did not know what that was until this next speaker came up to us and talked to us about it during auditions. Shripad, our final speaker for today, is here to talk to us about the superbug phenomenon, and especially how it affected his grandmother and how he took that as an inspiration to do more research on it. Let's give it up for Shripad.
So my presentation today will be about superbugs. Malaria, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's. These are the sorts of images that people generally think about when they think about biological threats to people. In fact, if you go down to your local science fair and see what projects students are doing, it's going to be about generally one of these 4 topics. When they in that regard, they'll be talking about either some prognosis or a diagnosis tool, and they'll probably be using machine learning. Well, what is machine learning? Well, machine learning has come a long way since it first began. It first began as a sort of fun thing that students could simply talk about, and it's something that only programmers knew about. Machine learning has now developed from something that only used to identify neuroimaging models, and has now been able to identify different areas of text-to-speech, and students are also using machine learning in order to apply it in their own programs, creating diagnosis and prognosis tools for tumors of, say, the brain, the chest, and all throughout the body. But there's a new threat, one that is not that far off, one that is currently killing 700,000 people and is likely to kill 10 million people each year by 2050. A threat that the government and public are simply not giving the attention it deserves. Superbugs. So what exactly is a superbug? Well, it's simply an antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Well, what does that mean? It simply means that we've been so effective at using antibiotics for the past few decades that now there are bacterial cultures all throughout the world that are now resistant to every single type of antibiotic we have. And so you may be thinking, so what? After all, we can just create more antibiotics. We've been doing that for the past half century. Well, the problem is bacteria are now evolving at such fast rates that we simply won't be able to create antibiotics fast enough. There are different strains of bacteria for E. coli, for pneumonia, and all sorts of diseases all around the world, and they're all resistant to antibiotics in different ways. What this means is that we simply cannot use rudimentary technologies of the past, in order to take us into the future. Classical technologies, like those of antibiotics, are just that, a classic. They can be used in rudimentary and fundamental situations, but they won't be able to keep up with what evolution has brought us with superbugs. And this is where machine learning comes into play. Machine learning is not just applicable to computer models. It can be applied to biological processes as well. And this is something that I believe is the future for superbugs in order to combat superbugs using medicine. I'll be taking you through time, starting with the old but gold technologies that are now having newer innovations, and then taking us into the innovations of the future. First, we have vaccines. Now, generally people know what vaccines are. After all, we've all had one, say the flu shot. A vaccine is simply when you take a pathogen and you insert it into an individual, and they confer an immune response that leaves behind some memory B cells. And these memory B cells are important simply because they allow for the next time that the pathogen enters into the system, it can allow for a response to happen much more quickly. The issue with this is that people only talk about viral vaccines. Those are the ones that we generally know about. For example, the flu shot. What we don't realize is that there are other types of vaccines as well, especially ones for bacterial pathogens. Reverse vaccinology is a technology that is currently being used in order to create vaccines at a faster rate than ever before. Essentially, you take the genetic information of the proposed pathogen that you're looking for, and you're creating a speculative model of what this organism looks like. You've never isolated it in solution, you've never had it in vitro. It's just a model, but an effective one. Because you take that genetic code, you translate it into proteins, and then you separate out the proteins that are attached to the cell membrane. And these are the ones that are most important because MHC mechanisms inside our bodies only can attach to and identify proteins on the surface of cells. So after we have these vaccines using reverse vaccinology, we can see that the trend for vaccines is going to go a lot more quickly. We've had 22 vaccines since 1980. And the rate at which vaccines are going to be created is going to be a lot greater in the future. Furthermore, vaccines are preventative and not rehabilitative. What this means is that it doesn't allow for a bacterial pathogen to mutate within the individual once the person becomes infected. Vaccines work by taking the shot before you're infected with the disease. And so it prevents other mutations for superbugs from occurring in the future. I guess that technology is pretty interesting, right? But something that's even more exciting and is coming in the near future is nanotechnology. I'm sure you guys have heard about graphene. It used to be a buzzword back in the day. And essentially, it's so easy to create that all you need is a block of graphite, like the lead at the tip of your pencil, and you need a piece of tape. And you can create this two-dimensional carbon material that is applicable across a wide variety of fields. In terms of medicine, this just means that we use a carbon oxide fiber and we insert it into individuals in order to help with parsing out between different types of bacteria. See, usually when people think about technology being used in medicine, we think of either prosthetics for individuals, or we think about, say, something to help us with their hearing or with our vision. What we don't realize is that the most potent forms of technology that we can use in medicine are naked to the are invisible to the naked eye. For example, there was a study done 2 years ago in which a carbon-based structure was created with an oxide in order to determine between PA, KP, and E. coli types of bacteria. And it has to parse these sorts of bacteria out in our blood and separate them and terminate them. When an in vitro study was done with macrophages and the carbon oxide fibers, the KP was eradicated almost immediately. Furthermore, when these nanofibers were inhaled by mice and went into the bloodstream, it was able to prevent the spread of KP throughout the body, prevent inflammation, and save the lives of these mice. And this is something that's extremely fundamental and unique and links to machine learning actually pretty well. Because if we think of classification algorithms today, we think of a more rudimentary example is like classifying between different numbers that are drawn on a piece of paper, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we think of those components and we think, okay, so the number 1 is a line. We think of 2 with a curve and a line and so forth. Well, instead of having these components be lines on a page, we think of these as proteins on a cell surface, bacteria in the blood. This is how we can use machine learning in the future. Now, the most exciting form of technology that we have in the future is phage therapies. The thing that I like most about phage therapies is that they can go toe-to-toe with bacteria as bacteria evolve. Well, how does that work? Well, first, what is a phage? A phage is simply a virus that infects bacteria. Now, some of you may be thinking, but wait, like bacteria and viruses are on one side, and humans, animals, plants, every other type of organism on the other side. We usually lump bacteria and viruses into the same group. Well, this is not necessarily true. After all, viruses, their only goal is to spread their genetic information, and they'll do that through bacteria. In fact, they have been doing that for billions and billions of years. So it only makes sense that we employ these phages as the best bet for us to fight superbugs in the future. It only makes sense that the most formidable foe of bacteria is what we can use to fight our most formidable foe, the superbug. What's key about phage therapy is that first, it can be parameterized. If you have a culture of viruses and the strain of a superbug in an agar plate, and you can culture them in order to have over multiple generations a virus that can be resistant to the bacteria and infect the bacteria. The most common forms of that today are T4 phages in the lytic phase. And that's just a fancy way of saying that it's an extremely potent form of virus that interacts with the bacteria and kills it before it completes a cell cycle. But what's even more important to realize is that not only can these be parameterized at the beginning, but as soon as you have the initial parameterization, I'm saying parameterization in order to connect between machine learning and the phage therapies that we have. Not only is it important, and not only is there parameterization, but there's also a lack of interference later on. This is because phage therapies can evolve alongside superbugs. The virus that you have parameterized in order to prevent the superbug, something that's already evolved in order to be stopped against every single form of antibiotic we have, can in itself evolve to meet the new demands. It can feed off the information that is being received in order to come up with new solutions and new mutations in populations over and over in time. That means after you have a phage therapy once or twice, that strain of bacteria will have someone to fight with, the phage, for its entire life and will likely be eradicated simply because the phage therapy evolves alongside the bacteria. In a machine learning algorithm, going back to that example with the numbers, if you have numbers 1 through 8 and you have an algorithm that sorts all of them, it's like feeding in information about the number 9 to make it more robust and then having that algorithm work. Except instead of a computer and a screen with a bunch of numbers, it's bacteria, viruses in our blood doing this every single day. When uniting nanotech and phage therapy, we can see that first, nanotech is able to parse out classifications, just like we do with machine learning algorithms. We see that phage therapy is able to evolve alongside information. taking information from the superbug as it is right now, and as the superbug evolves, the phage can evolve alongside it. And it doesn't even need any help. You don't need to culture it in a solution. It'll do it on its own, because that is the biological process that drives change. So I guess what I'm saying is, with nanotechnologies that have fluorescent lightings to filter out between different types of bacteria, or with phage therapies, like the T4 lytic phage, that can evolve to meet the demands of superbugs, or with something as simple as a vaccine, which actually was recently created the meningococcus vaccine. The meningococcus vaccine being probably a vaccine you've already taken, it was created using the reverse technology that I had talked about earlier. These are things that are happening now in order to prevent the spread of superbugs into the future, in order to stay up to date with the superbugs as they evolve, and finally, to be able to unite the world of machine learning, the world in which we usually think of computers and computer design, with the world of medicine and biology, to be able to help save lives, to prevent the fact that 10 million people are likely to die of superbugs if such a problem is not fixed. We can understand machine learning better through biological systems and unite the two in order to create a more potent understanding of classifications and of life, of viruses and of machine learning. And this is where I think the future will take us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shripad, for your amazing drive and passion for researching superbugs. Well, with TEDxYouth at Torrey Avenue 2019 coming to a close, we'd like to take this moment to bring back all of our speakers on stage so that we can thank them one last time for the amazing performances that they gave us today.
We'd also like to thank Mr. Matt Lorenzo, Mr. Danny Mestizo, our awesome video and production staff, and all the other amazing study staff that helped this event happen. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts, because we could not have done this without all of you.